All right, so welcome to my ground school. Okay, today we're going to talk about a commercial maneuver. This maneuver is a maneuver that we're going to have to do when we do our commercial training, and it's a mandatory maneuver when we're doing our commercial check ride. Okay, so I know none of you guys have much flight experience, so I'm going to try to break this down in a way that everybody can understand. Okay, so to start, let me pull up my presentation. Give me 1 second. I'm trying to find where it is. Let me airdrop it so I can have it on my phone. 1 sec. Airdrop to the iPad. All right, I got it here. All right, so now I have my presentation in front of me. Okay. So here we go. So I'm gonna put this right here. So this maneuver, once again, it's called the power off 180. Okay? Power off 180 approach to land, because we're coming in to land at the airport with no power. Okay? So that's why it's called power off 180 approach to land. And so why do we do this maneuver, you may ask, okay? Well, glad that you asked. The reason that we do this maneuver is what? To develop judgment in estimating distance and glide ratios, okay? So the objective is, I'm going to change the color, is to develop judgment in estimating distances and glide ratios, okay? So in a second here, I'm going to put up on the board an illustration of the maneuver, and you're going to see that in this maneuver, we're going to reach a certain point, and at that certain point, we're going to cut the power to idle, and we're going to glide the airplane down to a very specific point on the runway. So that's why, and the reason we do this is, once again, to develop judgment in estimating distances and glide ratios. So we want to be able to see and develop a vision, because this is not a maneuver you can just explain. You actually have to go on the airplane and actually do it yourself. So as we practice this maneuver, our intuition becomes a lot better. So we start to kind of just feel out the airplane and take into these different variables into effect without really thinking about it. And then we come in and we land. So that's the objective. So what are some of the common errors, right? When we're doing maneuvers, there's usually a trend of specific things that students tend to mess up, right? So as I'm flying with a new student that's never done this maneuver before, they might do one of these mistakes. And my job as an instructor is to catch that mistake and be aware of it and fix it. So what are some of these errors? Okay, so common errors. Adding flaps prematurely. Okay, that's the first error. So when we're coming in, we're flying, and flaps, they add drag. So if we add drag and we don't have any more engine power, because remember we cut the engine to idle, we're gonna come down a lot faster. And if we can't add power, we can't get any more altitude. So what we have is all we have. So we want to make sure that we're very conservative about when we start to add the flaps, because once we lose altitude and speed, we can't get that back. Okay, so that's one of the common errors, is adding flaps too early. So another one is failure to consider the winds. So let me take a step back. Before I get too deep into the common errors, I'm going to go ahead and draw out a picture of the diagram, okay? So first is objectives, then I'm gonna put out the diagram, and then 3 I'm gonna get into the common errors. We already got into one of them, but we'll continue to get into more of them now as I continue to explain this maneuver. So we have a runway, okay? A runway looks like this. All right, we have a runway right here, okay? And then on the runway, we have the number of the runway. In this case, we're gonna use the example of the runway that we would use at the airport that I fly at. And a lot of times when we do this maneuver, they're gonna give us the runway 9 left, okay? So that's the numbers, and then beyond the numbers, we have what's called the 1,000-foot markers. So when you see these on the runway, that you know you're 1,000 feet into the runway. So then we have the center line markings that continue on, and then at the end of the runway we have our other 1,000-foot markers. All right, so we're departing our airplanes right here, okay? This is the departure end of the runway, so we depart, and then we get into what's called the upwind. All right, so this is the upwind over here. I don't want to get too deep into the traffic pattern because that's a more beginner thing, and I'm not explaining a beginner concept right now. I'm explaining something a little bit more advanced. So I'm assuming that you guys would have already known what a traffic pattern is. So I'm just kind of explaining to you now the names of the legs of the traffic pattern, just to kind of make you guys a little bit familiar with it. This is not a whole traffic pattern lecture. So the first leg that we have is called the upwind. Then we have the crosswind, okay? Then we have what's called the downwind, okay? So that's the downwind right here. Downwind. And then you have what's called base, okay? This is your base right here, terrible handwriting. Base. And then you have your final. So down here, you have what's called final. All right, so these are the different legs of the traffic pattern, okay? So when we're doing this maneuver, remember how I said we're gonna cut the power off? When we have to do that at a very specific point on the actual phase of flight that we're in. In this case, we're gonna depart, we're gonna request to do a short approach, and then they're gonna clear us. We have to listen for a clearance. They're gonna clear us to do it. So we go to the upwind, right? Then we turn crosswind, and then we fly into the downwind, all right? So then we're flying in the downwind, we're flying along, okay, we're flying, everything's good, and then bam! Right here, perfect. The engine just cuts off. All right, so now we don't have any more power. Whatever, that's like a realistic scenario. And like in training, we're gonna cut the power to idle. Once we're what's called a beam, the touchdown point. Okay, so when we're abeam the touchdown point, which in this case, we've decided that we're gonna put the airplane down right at 1,000-foot markers. Okay, so our touchdown point is gonna be the 1,000-foot markers touchdown point. All right. So that's where we're gonna touch down, and then we're also gonna determine an aiming point, right? And we're gonna aim for the numbers. Okay. And we're gonna touch down on the 1,000-foot markers. So why am I gonna aim for the numbers if I'm gonna touch down on the 1,000-foot markers? Great question. I'm glad that you asked. The reason that we do that is because when we fly down, the airplane is going to get into ground effect. And basically this is an increase in performance of lift when we're flying close to the ground. So if we aim for the numbers, right, and we try to put it down on the numbers, our Cessna 172, our specific aircraft, because it's a high wing, it's gonna want to float over the runway. So as we come in, right, we're coming in, and then it's just we're gonna level off and we're gonna float down the runway, and then it's gonna land. So that's why we aim for the numbers, and our touchdown point is gonna be the 1,000-foot markers, right? So aiming point is gonna be the numbers. All right, so we're flying along and then we lose power. The aircraft loses power at once you're being the touchdown point. So now we're gonna come down. All right, so we're gonna glide down and we're gonna aim. We're gonna come down, we're gonna turn base, and we have to judge it just right. We have to consider the direction of the winds. In this case, we're gonna keep it simple, and we're gonna imagine that the winds are coming directly from the east. So the winds are coming from 090, it's our cardinal direction, at, let's say, 10 knots, right? So from 090 at 10. So that's coming straight down the runway. That's the winds are coming straight down the runway. And then this right here is our windsock. So as we're flying down, right, we're getting pushed. We're getting pushed out, right? So we have to be aware of that, because if we're getting pushed out and we don't have power, we have to come back. Like, how are we gonna come back if we don't have more power? That's why we have to be very, very careful and very, very mindful of where the winds are coming from, because once you do something in this maneuver, you can't get it back. You're gonna have to do some finessing to really get it back. So it's just better to do it right and the first time, so you don't have to make these corrections. So in this case, think about it. If the winds are pushing us this way and we're flying this way, we're gonna be coming out way faster that way. So we're gonna want to turn our base a little bit sooner. So we turn our base. Now guess what? The wind is pushing us. It's still pushing us away, because it's coming this way and we're flying down this way. So now the airplane, we're gonna want to turn it into the wind in that situation. So we're gonna do something like this. You see how the airplane is kind of turning towards the runway now? So we're doing something like that. And then as we're flying in and getting closer, we're gonna turn it in more and more until we can finally get it aligned with the actual runway, okay? So we're gonna line up with the runway, and once we know that we're gonna make the runway, back to the common errors, we know we're gonna make the runway. We didn't know that before because we're way up in the air. Now we know we're gonna add flaps. Okay, now is when we're gonna start adding the flaps. We're gonna start adding those flaps. Boom. Start adding that drag. We gotta get down. We're gonna make the runway. We gotta make our point. We're probably a little bit too high. We might be. Depends. You have to be very mindful of it. And if you're flying, I'll take you guys up and we practice this maneuver until we get it right. But you have to be mindful. You have to be very mindful of your altitude and your airspeed, and you have to be very careful about when you add your flaps. Okay? So that's our common error. That's our first common error there, okay? So the next common error that we're gonna get into, right? And so I know there's a lot of information, but we're gonna get into more of the common errors. But yeah, like once we make the runway, boom, we're gonna get to the aiming point. We're gonna flare at the aiming point, right? We're gonna flare. The airplane's gonna float down, and boom, we're gonna touch it right here, where the X is. That's what we're aiming for. Right, we're gonna touch it down right there. If we do everything right, it's gonna be perfect. So, what's the next common error that we need to be aware of is failure to consider the winds, which we got into that a second ago, right? If you don't know where the winds are coming from, how are you gonna do this maneuver right? What if the winds are coming from south to north and you have a crosswind? If the winds are coming like this, you know, you're gonna have a big problem. You have to know where the winds are coming from. Okay, so that's another area that you might experience during this maneuver. Okay, another thing that we have to be aware of, very important with this maneuver, we have to make sure that we don't put the power to idle. So improper use improper use of power. Okay, so if you are on your check ride, right, and you pull the power back, but you're not at idle, you didn't cut the power back all the way, and you do this maneuver, and the examiner is seeing this, and they don't say anything, and you land and you do everything right, but you didn't cut the power to idle, you fail, because you didn't do the maneuver right. You have to make sure that you cut the power to idle, okay? So that's improper use of power. So that's a common error that might happen there. Like, you have to make sure that you cut the power to idle. Okay, the next one is not maintaining a stabilized approach, right? What does that mean? What that means is you're coming in all crooked. Like, you're not coming in right. If you come in and you're uncoordinated, and your airplane's all over the place, and you're up and down in altitude, and you're coming in and you're off the center line, very dangerous, very dangerous. You have to make sure that you're on point with this. This is a simulated maneuver, okay? So if you have some kind of issue or something gets on the runway, or you think it's going to be a little bit of a dangerous maneuver, just go around. It's better to be safe, even though it's not part of the maneuver. Just be ready to do it if you have to. If you're coming along and you see something on the runway, boom, go around. It's not part of the maneuver, but it's better to be safe than to do something dangerous. So, not maintaining a stabilized approach. That's our next one. So the next common error that we see a lot of students do is failure to establish approach in proper sequence. Not really sure what that means, but I'll get into that another time. Failure to establish approach in proper sequence. So one second. Let me find that for you. Hold on. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna pause this video. I'm gonna send it to you guys, and then I'm gonna record the second part.